Okay, so we're diving into something pretty fascinating today. It's this publication called Kennedy Assassination Chronicles,
Uh-huh.
Volume 8, Issue 3 from 2002. And it's not just any old history book.
Right.
We're talking articles, book reviews, obituaries, and all of it's centered on, you guessed it, JFK's assassination.
What I find so interesting about this is it's really targeted at a specific community.
Yeah.
You know, those dedicated to uncovering all the mysteries surrounding JFK's death, even all these years later. It's like a reminder that history is rarely ever settled.
Absolutely. And there are always new perspectives popping up, right?
Exactly.
And this issue, it doesn't just focus on those big names we always hear about, like Oswald or the Kennedys themselves. It also highlights the lives of, well, seemingly regular folks who were touched by this event. Like Doris Jacoby, for instance.
Oh, the photographer.
Yeah, a female press photographer who was actually assigned to photograph Jacqueline Kennedy during that Dallas trip.
And didn't one of her photographs end up in the 6th floor museum?
You're exactly right. The former Texas School Book Depository. It's incredible, right?
Really speaks to the impact of her work.
Absolutely. But what struck me was her drive. I mean, after finding out about the assassination, she hitched a ride on a police motorcycle to get to Parkland Hospital.
Wow. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right. Dedication to capturing that historic moment.
It shows you how powerful that event was, even for those who weren't directly involved, like a national tragedy, you know? Shook everyone to their core.
Totally. And then there's this guy, Guy F. Rose,
Okay.
a homicide detective with the Dallas Police Department. And get this, he was one of the detectives who interrogated Lee Harvey Oswald.
Whoa. Imagine the weight of that responsibility.
Right. Questioning the man accused of killing the president. And his obituary paints him as like this super honest, dedicated guy, dedicated to his job, treating every victim like family. To be involved in such a huge case, you can't help but wonder what must have gone through his mind.
It definitely adds another layer to the story, understanding those people who were right there in the middle of it all.
Right. And then we come to Theodore G. Shackley.
Okay.
So he was a high-ranking CIA official, long history of covert operations.
I see where this is going.
Right. His presence in this issue really hints at that whole world of espionage.
Yeah.
All the intelligence stuff that surrounds any discussion about JFK.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
You can't really separate them, can you?
Not really. It's like trying to understand a shadow without knowing the shape of the object that's casting it.
And the shadows in this case, they're pretty long and tangled. Decades of speculation and debate.
That's for sure.
Okay, now this next one is interesting. Dr. Paul C. Peters Sr.,
Right.
a urologist but also part of the medical team that tried to save JFK at Parkland. Imagine going from the trauma of that day to then becoming a pioneer in kidney transplantation.
Wow. That's quite a journey.
Right. You think about the human spirit. But there's this other thing about Dr. Peters that just stuck with me. There's this discrepancy between his first testimony about JFK's head wound and what he remembered later.
Oh, yeah. That's fueled a lot of conspiracy theories.
Did someone pressure him to change his story? Was it just a memory lapse?
Tough to say for sure, but it makes you question the reliability of eyewitness accounts, you know? Especially in a moment like that, so chaotic and emotional.
And how trauma affects our memories over time.
Exactly. Even when we think we're telling the truth, how much can we really trust our own memories?
A question that hangs over a lot of historical investigations, especially when the stakes are this high. But hey, how about we switch gears a bit and talk about this film review? They're covering the movie RFK.
Oh, yeah. The one that was on FX.
You got it. It covers the last 5 years of Robert Kennedy's life leading up to his own tragic assassination. Some critics said it didn't reveal anything new, but honestly, I thought the way they showed RFK's transformation after his brother's death was really powerful.
It's like his whole worldview shifted, right?
Yeah, you could see how that event shaped his views on politics, social justice, everything.
It's amazing how personal tragedy can spark change, not just for the individual, but for society as a whole.
Absolutely. Okay, brace yourself, because this next one is a deep dive within a deep dive. We've got the Russ Holmes work file.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So it's this massive collection of over 6,000 CIA documents. We're talking over 40,000 pages.
That's a lot of reading.
It is, but it's like a peek behind the curtain of intelligence operations, you know?
So we can see how the CIA was reacting to things as they happen.
Exactly. And what's really cool is you see these documents in context. Not just isolated bits of info, but how they all fit together.
It gives you a much deeper understanding of what they were doing and why. especially relating to the assassination.
Exactly. And two things really stood out to me in the Holmes file. First, the Garrison investigation, and then there's Operation Amtrunk-Chromsteamer.
Both pretty controversial and shrouded in secrecy.
So this guy, Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney, he launches this whole investigation into the assassination. The CIA, not happy about it.
I bet.
They even set up a special Garrison team to handle it. Their memos show how worried they were about this investigation, about it revealing sensitive info. They were super meticulous in documenting their attempts to counter it, focusing on a bunch of names connected to the case.
Like who?
Well, there's Santana, Fernandez, Laborde, Penique. Sounds like a spy novel, right?
It does.
But each name is a potential lead, a connection that can take us deeper into this whole thing.
Right.
And then we have Operation Amtrunk-Chromsteamer.
Yeah, okay.
It was a covert op-in aimed at removing Fidel Castro from power. The level of secrecy surrounding it is, well, mind-blowing.
Reflects the times, I guess. Cold War tensions, the U.S. trying to contain communism, high stakes.
Absolutely. And the Holmes files, they reveal these anxieties within the CIA, security breaches, fears of Cuban infiltration.
The classic mole hunt.
Right. And then there's the question of JFK's involvement. The CIA claims they were acting against his wishes, but these documents, they suggest otherwise.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who was really pulling the strings? Was Kennedy in the loop about all of it?
The Holmes files don't give us easy answers. They challenge us to really think critically, weigh the evidence, and come to our own conclusions.
That's what makes this deep dive so engaging, right? We're not being told what to think. We're being invited to participate in figuring it all out.
Now, have you ever heard of this film, Interview with the Assassin?
The one that's like a mockumentary blurring of fact and fiction?
Yes. It's about this cameraman who meets Walter Ollinger, a man who claims he was involved in JFK's assassination. The way it's filmed, it feels so real, which makes what Ollinger says even more unsettling.
It really makes you question everything. Is this guy telling the truth, or is he a master manipulator?
Right. It taps into that part of us that's drawn to conspiracy theories, that desire to believe there's more to the story than we've been told.
It highlights how hard it is to find the truth, especially when information is constantly being twisted and manipulated.
Okay, now let's switch gears again. There's this article that challenges a pretty wild theory. The idea that Robert Kennedy was actually responsible for his brother's death.
The Pearson Steele thesis?
Right. They suggest that Fidel Castro retaliated against JFK for the CIA's attempts to kill him, and that RFK was the one pushing for those assassination attempts.
Basically implying RFK had a hand in his own brother's murder.
Crazy, right. But Vincent J. Salandria, the author of this article, he completely dismantles that theory. He points out that RFK himself believed JFK was killed by a conspiracy and was trying to get to the bottom of it.
That makes sense.
Salandria also highlights that, historically, JFK was trying to normalize relations with Castro at the time of his death.
Which wouldn't make a Castro-led retaliation very likely.
Exactly. Salandria argues that RFK's public silence about the assassination was a strategic choice. He was trying to keep things calm, recognizing the forces at play.
It's a heavy burden to bear.
It really makes you think about what he knew and the choices he had to make after his brother's death. Okay, last but not least, we have Eric Hamburg. He wrote JFK, Nixon, Oliver Stone, and me.
He had a foot in both worlds, didn't he? Trying to get the JFK documents released and then working in Hollywood.
He was a key player in getting the Assassination Records Act of 1992 passed. A huge win for government transparency.
It's inspiring, that one person can push for change and make a real difference.
And then he goes to Hollywood and works with Oliver Stone on films like Nixon and Any Given Sunday.
Talk about a career change.
Right. But throughout it all, his fascination with the JFK assassination never faded. It really shows how this event continues to grip people, even after all these years. It's a story that just won't let go.
The power of history, especially when it's tangled up with mystery and unanswered questions, it just keeps drawing us in. It's amazing how many different threads come together in this whole JFK assassination.
It's true. It's like this event, it had this pull, drawing in people and stories from everywhere.
And each story adds a whole new layer of complexity, pushing us past those simple explanations.
You're right. It's not just about who pulled the trigger. It's about the motivations, the hidden agendas, the forces that caused this whole thing to happen.
And that's what makes these unusual sources so valuable, I think. They give us a new way to look at it.
A new lens. One that goes beyond those official reports and those same old theories.
Exactly.
It's like catching glimpses of those whispers in the shadows.
The stuff that's often missed in those traditional history books.
Exactly. And sometimes those whispers lead to some pretty surprising things.
They make you question everything you thought you knew.
Okay, let's talk about that discrepancy in Dr. Peters' testimony.
Yeah.
About how bad JFK's head wound actually was.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one. A lot of debate around that.
At first, he described this massive wound, right? Exposed brain matter, which kind of supports the idea that the shot came from the front.
Right.
But then later, he said only the upper part of the skull was visible.
Which aligns more with the Warren Commission, doesn't it?
The lone gunman firing from the back.
So what changed? Was he pressured? Or did his memory just, fade over time, maybe because of the trauma of that day?
Impossible to say for sure, but it does highlight the problems with eyewitness accounts, especially for such a huge event.
And don't forget, Dr. Peters didn't actually see those autopsy photos until much later.
Oh, right. He was going off of pure memory.
Yeah.
In that crazy emotional moment.
Exactly. It really shows you how limited our perception can be, how hard it is to truly reconstruct the past.
It's always going to be subjective, in a way.
Yeah. We all have our own biases, our own experiences that color how we see things. That's why it's so important to look at it from all sides, compare different accounts, and be open to new information.
Especially with something like the JFK assassination, with all its mystery and controversy.
What's really interesting to me? Those names that came up in the Garrison investigation. Santana, Fernandez, Laborde, and Panek.
The ones the CIA saw as threats to their operations? Yeah. Their links to covert ops in Cuba, like with the Dahanets II, that ship linked to key figures in the anti-Castro movement.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion, right? The deeper you go, the more intrigue you find.
Exactly. It's like there's this whole secret world operating beneath the surface. Secrets, betrayals, high-stakes games. And you can't understand the JFK assassination without understanding that world.
You're absolutely right.
It's like a hidden history.
Exactly. Their stories might be hidden, but they're crucial pieces of this whole puzzle.
And like we've seen, a lot of these events go beyond U.S. borders.
Right into Cuba.
A reminder of the global context.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to Operation Amtrak Cam Steamer, that mission to get rid of Castro.
A real example of how far the U.S. government was willing to go during the Cold War.
The Holmes files really take you inside that operation. The planning, the recruiting, the constant struggle to keep everything under wraps.
The worries, that fear of leaks, right? Someone talking.
Exactly, and worries about Cuban spies, about losing control of their own people.
Like a giant game of chess. Every move could have meant disaster.
It makes you think about how much control the CIA really had over it all, especially with those questions about JFK's involvement.
Was he the mastermind behind it, or was he trying to pull the CIA back?
Another mystery to unravel. And that's what I find so fascinating about the JFK assassination. It's this puzzle box of intrigue. So many different viewpoints, conflicting stories. It's like this never-ending puzzle.
It keeps us coming back for more. This desire to understand, to piece together the evidence, to maybe one day find some kind of truth.
And that search for truth, well, it doesn't always take you where you expect. It can challenge your assumptions, make you face some uncomfortable realities.
Like that film, Interview with the Assassin.
Right. It throws you into this world where nothing is certain, where you can't really trust anyone.
The way it's filmed, like a documentary, it blurs the lines.
You're never quite sure what's real and what's made up. It makes you wonder, is Walter Olinger this honest witness, or is he just playing everyone?
That's the brilliance of it. It doesn't give you easy answers. It makes you think about your own beliefs about the assassination. It makes you consider the possibility that the truth might be much more complex and much more disturbing than you ever thought.
Like that saying, truth is stranger than fiction. And in the case of JFK, it seems the truth is a lot harder to find, too.
It's amazing.
It really is. It all comes back to this question. Who can you trust? Who's telling the real story in all of this?
Especially when you're dealing with figures like E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy.
Entangled in all those covert operations, all that political maneuvering.
Their involvement in Watergate alone makes you question their credibility and their possible roles in other secret activities.
And the CIA actually supplied them with disguises and resources for spying within the U.S. That's crazy. It really blurs the lines.
It does. It's a constant reminder that things aren't always what they seem. And those in power, well, they often play by a different set of rules.
Rules that value secrecy over everything else. Protecting their version of the story, even if it means hiding the truth. That's why it's so refreshing to find someone like Eric Hamburg, who is so dedicated to getting those JFK files released.
A true advocate for transparency.
His journey from working in Congress on the Assassination Records Act of 1992 to then working with Oliver Stone on those films about some of America's most controversial events. It's remarkable.
It really is.
It shows you that the search for truth can take you in many different directions, and that anyone, even those working within those systems that thrive on secrecy, can play a part in bringing hidden truths to light.
You don't have to be a whistleblower to make a difference.
Exactly. And speaking of hidden truths, let's talk about Vincent J. Salandria's take on the Pearson-Steele thesis, that theory that tries to pin JFK's assassination on Robert Kennedy.
And one Salandria pretty much dismantles.
Exactly. He points out that RFK was totally against the Warren Commission's findings. He believed his brother was killed as part of a conspiracy.
That makes sense.
And he highlights that JFK was actively trying to improve relations with Cuba when he was killed.
Which throws a wrench in the whole revenge assassination idea.
Totally. Salandria believes that RFK's silence on the whole thing was a calculated move, a way to keep the peace, understanding the dangerous forces at play.
It must have been a heavy burden to carry. All that grief, all that responsibility.
It makes you think about what he knew and the choices he had to make after his brother's death.
He was in an impossible situation.
He was. And it shows you the complexity of trying to find the truth, especially in cases like this, sifting through layers of lies, evaluating those conflicting stories, and realizing that we can never truly know everything.
We have to accept those limitations and use our judgment.
Right. And be ready to face some uncomfortable truths, even if they challenge everything we believe.
Even if it means rewriting our understanding of history.
You know, it's pretty amazing how the JFK assassination, it still feels so relevant today. This whole deep dive has shown just how big of an impact it had on culture, politics, even movies.
It's a real turning point in history, isn't it? It shapes how we see things like power, truth, the whole search for answers.
Exactly. And I think Eric Hamburg's story, it really shows that going from working in Congress to working with Oliver Stone in Hollywood, all because his fascination with JFK.
Pretty incredible.
It's like this event sparked something in him, this drive to find the truth that led him down all these unexpected paths.
Yeah.
And his work on that Assassination Records Act, that was huge.
Absolutely. A real step forward for transparency, getting all those secret documents released.
It makes you realize that one person can really make a difference, even when you're up against, like, the CIA.
It's inspiring.
And then to go and work on Oliver Stone's films, that's a wild turn.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right. Stone's films, especially JFK, they brought the assassination back into the spotlight, got people talking again, sparked new investigations. They showed how powerful film can be, challenging the official story, asking those tough questions that might have been forgotten.
It's a good reminder that history isn't fixed. It's always being looked at in new ways.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into these Kennedy Assassination Chronicles, I think it's important to remember what this event really stands for. It's a reminder that democracy is fragile,
Right.
that power can be dangerous when it's unchecked. And it speaks to that human need to understand tragedy, to find answers.
To make sense of it all.
Exactly. It urges us to think critically, question what we're told, and to never stop searching for the truth, no matter how hard it is to find.
Absolutely.
What parts of this whole story really stood out to you? Where would you go next in your own search for answers?
I find the connections between intelligence agencies, political agendas, and how information gets manipulated, that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. The more we understand that, the closer we get to understanding what really happened, not just with the assassination itself, but the aftermath, the way it shaped America.
I totally agree. We've just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
There's so much more to uncover, so many different sides to the story. That's what makes it so gripping.
Yeah, it's a story that keeps evolving. New evidence, new connections, they keep popping up.
It's like a puzzle that never ends.
Right. It shows that history isn't just dates and facts. It's a living thing, a conversation that's constantly changing. The JFK assassination, it's maybe the best example of that, this back and forth between the past, the present, and the future.
Well said. It's time for us to wrap up this deep dive, but before we go, we want to leave you with this. The search for truth is tough. There are going to be roadblocks, but it's worth it. It's in that search that we find meaning, understanding, and maybe even a sense of justice. So keep asking questions, keep digging, and never stop looking for those answers, even when the mystery seems impossible to solve.